DAGON. H.P. Lovecraft. Translated by Ryutaro Ohori. I write this under great stress. I will not be alive tonight. My money is gone, and my medicines are gone. I cannot bear the pain any longer. I will throw myself out of this attic window into the filthy street below. Please do not think that morphine addiction has weakened my body and corrupted my mind. Read this messy, scribbled note and you will see, if not fully understand, why on earth I desire oblivion and death. It was in one of the more open and least trafficked parts of the vast Pacific Ocean that the liner on which I was serving as supercargo was captured by German raiders. The war had just begun, and the Germans' navy was not in the state it later became. The ship was legally made booty, and the crew, as naval prisoners of war, were treated with due fairness and consideration. Thanks to their very lenient military discipline, I managed to escape 5 days after being captured, with enough water and food to last me a long time, in a small boat. I was finally free and adrift, but I had no idea where I was. Not a good navigator, I could only vaguely guess, from the position of the sun and stars, that I was slightly south of the equator. I had no idea of my latitude, and no islands or coastlines were in sight. The days continued to be sunny, and I drifted aimlessly for days under the scorching sun, waiting to be washed up on the shore of a passing ship or some habitable land. But with no ship or land in sight, I began to despair at being isolated in the vast swells of the endless ocean. It was while I was sleeping that things changed. I don't know exactly what happened, for I continued to slumber, even though my dreams had kept me from sleeping well. When I finally woke up, I found myself half engulfed in a gooey, pitch-black mud. The mud rolled out monotonously as far as the eye could see. A short distance away, a boat was beached. You might think that I would be surprised at this extraordinary and unexpected change in scenery. But in truth, I was more scared than surprised. There was an ominous feeling in the air and the rotting mud around me, and it chilled me to the core. There was a terrible stench in the air, and the carcasses of rotting fish and other indescribable-looking things jutted out from the endless plain of filthy mud. Perhaps words alone cannot convey the indescribable horror of the barren, infinite space and complete silence. I could hear nothing and see nothing but the black mud. And yet the complete silence of the surroundings and the monotony of the landscape weighed heavily on my mind and filled me with a nauseating horror. The sun was shining brightly, and the pitiless, cloudless sky was almost black, reflecting the inky marshland beneath our feet. As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized there was only one explanation for my situation. An unprecedented volcanic upheaval must have raised part of the ocean floor to the surface, revealing an area hidden for millions of years in the bottomless depths. The new land beneath my feet was so vast that no matter how hard I listened, I could hear not even the faintest sound of waves. And there were no seabirds to scavenge for the carcasses. I don't know why, but that night I had a crazy dream. Before the waning moon rose high over the eastern plain, I woke up in a cold sweat and decided not to sleep again because I couldn't bear to relive the dream I had just had. I felt foolish for walking in the daylight, bathed in moonlight. It would have been easier without the scorching sun. In fact, I hesitated when the sun set, but now I felt like I could climb the hill. I packed my bags and set off for the top of the hill. I have written before that the uninterrupted monotony of the rolling plains makes me feel indescribable fear. But when I reached the top and looked down into the infinitely deep canyon on the other side of the hill, I felt even more terrified. The moon was still low and did not illuminate the dark canyon. I felt as if I was standing at the edge of the world, peering over its edge into the bottomless chaos of an eternal night. Strangely, and with a sense of terror, images of paradise lost and the terrible devil rising from the formless land of darkness came to my mind. As the moon rose higher in the sky, I began to see that the slope of the valley was not as steep as I had thought. Ledges and outcrops of stone provided excellent footholds for the descent, and after a steep drop of several hundred feet the slope seemed to ease off. Driven by an inexplicable impulse, I struggled down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope below, peering down into the pitch blackness where no light had yet shone. My attention was suddenly drawn to a large and strange object on the opposite slope, towering about 100 yards ahead of me. It shone white in the light of the increasing moonlight. I immediately knew that it was a huge rock. But I also had a strong impression that its shape and position were not the result of natural forces alone. As I looked more closely, I felt an indescribable sensation. Though enormous in size and having existed in a gaping trench in the ocean since the earth was young, the strange object was a well-formed monolith whose enormous bulk seemed undoubtedly to have been worked on and perhaps worshipped by intelligent creatures in the past. Stunned with fear, but also with a certain thrill that is the joy of scientists and archaeologists, I examined my surroundings more closely. The moon was now near its zenith, shining mysteriously brightly over the high cliffs that ringed the valley, and I could see a wide river flowing at the bottom, curved so that it was impossible to see upstream or downstream, and the water came up to my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the valley, the waves washed over the base of the enormous monolith. I could make out writing and crude carvings on the monolith's surface. The inscriptions were in hieroglyphics, but the I had seen in books. Most of the characters were stylized aquatic animals such as fish, eels, octopuses, crustaceans, mollusks, and whales. Some characters seemed to represent sea creatures unknown to the modern world, apart from the decaying carcasses found on the plains created by the rise of the ocean floor. What particularly caught my eye were the images on the sculptures. Their sheer size made them clearly visible across the river, and the stone surfaces were lined with bas-relief sculptures, with motifs that would make the artist's door jealous. The sculptures seemed to represent humans, or at least some kind of human, who seemed to frolic like fish in underwater caves and worship at a monolithic altar that seemed to lie beneath the waves. I won't go into detail about their faces and figures, for the mere thought of them is enough to make me faint. They were grotesque beyond the imagination of writers like Poe or Bulwer, yet, to my dismay, their general outlines were very human, despite their webbed limbs, their shockingly large, loose lips, their wide, glassy eyes, and other features that are too disgusting to even contemplate. Curiously, the sizes of the humans and the sculptures in their backgrounds seemed grossly out of proportion. For example, in the scene where one of them is killing a whale, the whale is only slightly larger than the human. As I have said, they were grotesque and bizarrely large. But I immediately thought they were imaginary gods invented by some primitive fishing and seafaring people, some race that had become extinct ages before the birth of Piltdown Man and the Neanderthals. I was awed by this unexpected glimpse into a past world beyond the imagination of even the most daring anthropologists. As I stood lost in thought, the moon cast a strange shadow on the river that flowed silently before me. Then, suddenly, I saw it. It rose to the surface with a slight ruffle, rose out of the dark water, and slid into view. The giant, abominable like Polyphemus, lunged at the monolith like a terrible monster from a nightmare. It wrapped its enormous, scaly arms around the monolith, bowed its ugly head, and made a slow, steady noise. I think I went mad then. I remember very little of my frantic climb up the slopes and cliffs, and my confused return to the stranded boat. I think I sang many songs, and laughed oddly when I could not. I vaguely remember a great storm shortly after I reached the boat, and at least heard thunder and a roaring sound that nature only makes when it is at its most violent. I found myself in a hospital in San Francisco. An American captain had found my boat in the middle of the ocean and taken me to the hospital. I told him many things in my confusion, but he paid little attention to them. My rescuers knew nothing about the rise of the land in the Pacific Ocean. And there was no point in telling him things they would not believe. Once I tracked down a well-known folklorist and asked him some ridiculous questions about the ancient Felicite legend of Dagon, the fish god. But I soon found him hopelessly common sense and stopped asking questions. At night, especially when the waning moon turns full and half, I can see the giant. I tried morphine, but the drugs only gave me temporary relief and made me a hopeless slave to them. So now I'm going to put an end to it all. I've written the whole story. Maybe my compatriots will find it useful, or maybe they'll just laugh at me and make me laugh. I often ask myself, could it be that what I saw there, if not all of it, was merely a vision? Did I hallucinate what I saw in my open boat after escaping the German ship, scorched by the sun and rambling nonsense? Whenever I ask myself this question, a terrifying image always comes vividly to my mind, as if an answer. When I think of the depths, I shudder to think of those nameless creatures. They may be slithering about the slimy bottom at this very moment, worshipping ancient idols made of stone, carving their hideous images into underwater obelisks of water-soaked granite. I can see the day when they will rise from the waves and drag down with their fetid claws the weak, war-weary remnants of humanity. I can see the black bottom rising as the land sinks and the whole world turns to hell. The end is near. I hear a sound at the door. It sounded like some huge, slimy thing slamming against the door. They wouldn't find me. God, those hands. At the window. At the window.